Hey everyone, I wanted to do a little demo with a skin tone portrait demo, showing how we can use less intentional, less like gradient shading and more just like counting on your layers and your colors to interact over many layers and blend sort of on their own. So you'll see me finishing up my drawing here. I am going to make sure that I use a light touch with my pencil. I'm going to go ahead and erase out a couple of the darker lines. And I like to go ahead, you'll see some odd shapes in there. That's me blocking out, this is where there's going to be a highlight, this is where we're going to have a lost shadow. Some of that will get covered up as we use our markers, of course, but it helps me have a plan, helps me kind of know where I'm going so I can go a little quicker. Also, making sure you keep your pencil light doesn't affect your markers as much, right? So use a hard lead if you've got it. So the very first thing I'm going to do, I've got this pale, kind of warm, yellowish tone. I'm going to use that to block in a lot of the mid, like showing where the light's hitting along the face and mid-tones. So I'm pre-toning those areas to be warm. It's also just nice because it's a low saturation marker, so it feels safer to lay down a lot of it all at once. And then I'm going to go ahead and be laying in, warming up and deepening some of those areas with this caramel color. You can see I'm swatching up in the right-hand corner. I'll try to remember to keep doing that as we go. So you can see I'm talking about like I'm not trying to get perfect gradients with every single color I'm laying down, because I'm aware that since we're raising to a pretty saturated color level, I can kind of count on many layers to go ahead and soften these edges for me. I am continually changing the direction of my strokes as each layer works in, and also not using the exact same shapes every time. So I'll get some variance in there. I'll also, slowly start to remove any streaks or strokes from it because I keep changing the direction of the marker and using them in different ways. So I'm using this purple to now tone a lot of areas. I'm going over a lot of the caramel areas, but in some places you're seeing it peep through where I know there's going to be a warmer sense of lighting. But I'm also using the purple in some areas where I didn't use the caramel, right? Because I just want those areas to be toned but not as saturated. So here you'll see me using, I think it's the only part I use the palette quote unquote method, because I don't have a pink that's not that saturated. So I'm picking up a little bit of one of my brighter pinks on a clear blending marker and applying it. So I tend to use the palette method more like that, for like I don't have the one color or the one like desaturated level of that color. So that's when I kind of use that. You know that I love to put in something really dark while I'm working. So whatever my darkest color is, I like to kind of know, so that I can find balance as I'm working. So that's why I've gone ahead and laid in the irises and the pupils of the eyes very darkly. It helps me kind of find the balance and know where I'm going, gives me my range of values. So I've got white for my highlights and that for my darkest, and now I know I need to figure out how everything falls in between those two things. As you can see, it is a pretty choppy still as I'm going through, and I'm starting to add like a warm taupe that has a slightly lavender cast, and then going over that with the lavender. You can start to see how many layers, even though it's quite choppy in the layout, start to blend together and really find soft edges without really creating gradients. I am using that dark blue, which is what is creating that darkest shadow, and a lot of a pale purple, which has pretty good translucency, but it's pretty bright. And then here in a second, I'm going to do the hair with the blue and use that same very translucent blue in order to tone a lot of my shadows. So I'm using a lot of purple, a lot of a mauve pink, and a taupey brown to create the skin tones here. Always changing the direction of my marker, always creating slightly different shapes, so I'm not just going over the exact same shape the same way over and over again, which is what's softening those edges and slowly blending them. I know right now it still looks a little intense. This is the scary section when you're like, no, it won't work. I promise it will. So this is that blue. I love using this marker. You'll come across markers occasionally that you just like a lot for doing things. This has a very nice translucency. It blends incredibly well. And this is the one that I'm going to use to tone a lot of those shadows without it seeming so strong. This one just effortlessly does soft edges, it seems sometimes. So I'm going to go back in with that caramel and go ahead and warm up that whole area again. I've realized like I've left that too light, so it's bringing it back into the same range with my other colors, finding that balance. And this paper is like not slick, so this is more of a traditional multimedia paper, not really a marker paper. For those of you who like to work on ones like that, I kind of wanted to make sure we had some demos of that. You can always try on all different papers. So going back through with those pinks, now I don't have to be as careful with them since I've realized I want like a deeper value, so I'm able to use them straight out of the marker instead of using my translucent markers or blenders. I'm using blues and purples, but when you think about what's all stacked in that area now, you've got that yellow base, you've got pinks, you've got blues, you've got purples, so they're kind of mixing together to create deep colors that are more neutralized because of all the different colors underneath them are stacked up, so it's not coming out blue, it's coming out kind of like a deep, warm brown, gray, cool gray, depending on where it is. So I'm using this very dark blue for my darkest shadows. It's got a bit of a purple tone to it, which makes it sit nicely with the purple shadow work that we've already built up for mid shadows. So this is our darkest bottom of our value range, right? And you can see we're trying to get some of those to reach really close to that almost black color we've got in the hair and the eyes. So you want your value range to be really well-rounded, really wide, well-represented. And then I'm using pinks in areas that there's more heat, more light on the face, pinks and yellows to sculpt those areas so that it feels warmer. And then as it turns towards the dark, it gets cooler, has blues and purples. You can see that they've started to really blend together all the different underlayers and all the things. Of course, there are edges still because I wasn't really focused on creating gradients, which is something you certainly can do. This is a pretty quick study. It took me about hour 20, hour and a half maybe. So I like using this style. It feels a little more painterly. I'm now going through with a colored pencil. I'm using it in kind of a pale peach color, and I'm using that to define a lot of our highlights and catch a couple sharp edges and things. Adding these in last allows me to go a little faster and be a little looser with my painterly effects because I know I can just go back and put them back in. But you could also work at preserving these areas. But I do think, this is why we teach color pencil and marker together. They play very nicely together. Now I've got a white. I've done the hardest highlights also with the white and using a black color pencil to do a couple like loose little hairs. Some finer and less bold strokes in the hairline help it break it up, feel a little bit more real. You can see how that highlight really helps to settle, round out our value range. And this is what we end up with. So you can see they ended up sort of blended in. There's certainly a more painterly approach to it, but you can create a lot of range with just a lot of layers. I hope that helps. Bye.